It's a real privilege, a pleasure, and a delight to be here at Waynedale Lodge this evening and to share a story that's very close to my heart. You're right back. Should have carried it with me. The apron I have in my hand was given to Carl Christian Herman in 1920, presented by Liberty Lodge number 300 AF and AM, Lincoln, Nebraska, to Carl C. Herman, initiated April 29, 1920, passed to the degree of fellowship May 13, 1920, raised June 8, 1920, signed James F. Thompson, Worshipful Master, and J. Lloyd McMaster, Secretary, and I'll talk about him a little bit later on. I was raised in 1967, and a year later I got a telegram, and we can see it here later on, from my uncle who said Grandfather Herman died September 25th, 1968. A couple months later, a package came in the mail with a note from Dr. Herman, who incidentally was a heart specialist and surgeon in Evansville for many years. He said, "This is Grandfather's apron. I think it'll mean more to you than anybody else in the family." I looked at it in 1968. I was principal of a school at the time and had a young boy, busy. I took the apron and I placed it with mine in the dresser drawer, like a lot of ours are. Bottom drawer, you know, put away. And literally out of sight, out of mind. I forgot about it. A few years later, like 43, when I was Worshipful Master, I was signing an apron. And as I signed the apron, something clicked, and I thought, I wonder if Grandfather's apron has his Masonic history on it. It did. And that started a chain of events that I will share with you tonight fuller. There are actually about 3 stories that go along with this. The first starts out with Carl Christian Herman. He was born in the late 1870s and went to seminary in Chicago, graduating in 1903, married Emma Smith, and was posted by the Methodist Church to a parish in Pueblo, Colorado. In 1907, she had a baby boy, Cedric. 24 days later, she died. Heartbroken, he got the coffin and took the body and his infant son back to Illinois to her parents. He had felt the call to go to India, and he thought maybe this was a little bit of God's retribution. But regardless, he was appointed by the Methodist Church to go to India. And he left later on in the fall of 1907. He he wrote back. There's no phone then. There wasn't much telegraph then. It was 3 months by ship to get out to India. No Suez Canal was operating. And a deaconess who had been serving in Pueblo, Colorado, named Florence Engelhardt, agreed to marry him and traveled out to India. They were married in Jabalpur and served together for a number of years. In 1914, Esther Herman was born. Esther Herman looked like this in 1932, but I'm jumping ahead a little bit. There were time for furlough, and they came back to the United States on the last ship out of Bombay before World War I in 1917. Got back to the United States, out to Nebraska, served a pastorate there for a little bit. The British would not give him a visa to go back to India because he was Herman, Herrmann. A little more German than they wanted in one of the British colonies at the time. So the church posted them to the Philippines. And they went out to the Philippines. Came back in 1920. And at that time, he received degrees of masonry in Liberty Lodge 300. Now, Liberty Lodge had just been formed a year previously because of many servicemen coming back to the States, and the work was just inadequate to take care of by the other lodges. So this new lodge was formed, and he was one of the earlier inductees, or ones to receive the degree. They went back to India in 1927. In 1932, and this picture was taken in 1932. Actually, it was taken at the Taj Mahal in Agra a few days before they took the train to go down to Bombay to put her on a ship to come back to the United States to go to college. This is what C.C. Herman looked like in 1927. Believe me, it was fun trying to dig out these old pictures. Now, what father wants to take an 18-year-old girl, put her on a ship in Bombay, knowing that ship was going to go from Bombay to Calcutta, to Singapore, to Melbourne, to Sydney, to Hong Kong, to Manila, and wherever before it got to San Francisco? I think we'd all have fear and trepidation. He'd lost one important woman in his life. Now his daughter is going back to the States. And I tell you all that previously to give you a little feel for what he must have been going through at the time. He took his Masonic apron and she got ready to get on the ship the night before, and he gave it to her and said, "Put this on top of your suitcase." And when that Pacific and Orient ship sails and gets out of the harbor, you get that apron out and you carry it to the captain of the ship. The P&O boats, British line. The ship sailed. He watched it go out. Returned back up country to his mission post for another 3 years before they had furlough. And Esther Herman, whose cabin, now, missionary families don't go first class. You understand? They're back cabin class, back out of the fantail, where the screws go through, where there's constant noise, it's bumpity-bumpity. I well remember because I made the same trip the same way. She graduated from Woodstock School in Missouri, India. I graduated from the same place a number of years later. But she got that out and went up towards the bridge, and one of the officers stopped her and said, "Miss, you cannot go up here. This is restricted area." She said, "But my father told me to carry this." She got it out to the captain. He said, "Oh, come with me." And he took her to the captain. The captain took a look at that apron, raised the flap, read the Masonic history, put it back down, handed it back to her and said, "Miss Esther, you take good care of this, and at your earliest opportunity, you return it to your father." She was dismissed from the bridge and went back to her cabin. Within the hour, a steward showed up and said, "Miss Esther, you want to pack your things and come with me?" From cabin class in the back end of the ship, where the noise is and the screws go through and the propeller's noise is constant, she was escorted up to the crew's quarters and berthed in the first mate's quarters, the cabin right next to the ship's captain, the master of the ship. The mate was moved in with the second mate, and they double bunked for the voyage. Dinner time came. And in those days, you had formal evening meals. Everybody stood until the master of the ship came and sat down and said, "Be seated." Sort of like we do in other places. He came, he looked around a little bit, and he said she had her assigned place. Every passenger did. He talked to the steward and he said, "Go down there." And he escorted Esther Herman right next to the left hand of the captain at the captain's table. She ate there for the remainder of the 3 months of the voyage. When they finally got to San Francisco and people were disembarking, he said, "Miss Esther, you just wait here. Don't get off with the others. I'm going to take care of you." I haven't been able to discover whether it was Cook or American Express, but they had an organization that was supposed to meet her and transport her and see that she got to the train to go to Cincinnati. But the captain personally took her off the ship and had made arrangements. There's another master mason there, and he escorted her to him, introduced himself, introduced her, and passed her into his hands. He was with her until they got her onto the train. She was introduced to the conductor, who was a master mason. When the train crews changed someplace along the line, I'm not sure where it was, whether it's Salt Lake or Denver or someplace in there, there's a knock on her door, and "Miss Esther, I want you to meet so-and-so. He's a brother, and he'll be escorting you on the rest of the way." Until he said, "Is this your uncle, Uncle Matthew in Cincinnati?" "Yes." He said, "Fine, you have a wonderful daughter here," and passed her off to the hands of her uncle. Brother, this is the way masonry is supposed to operate. I didn't really get all this put together. I'd heard it as a kid, 8, 9 years old. At that time, it was fairly fresh to my mother. It wasn't that many years after she'd had the experience. She married my father and later went back to India, and where Dad had a tremendous impact on the new country and education, which is another story. But as I looked at this, I realized that the fraternity did what a fraternity is supposed to do. And as I began looking at it a little bit, I wondered, is Liberty Lodge still in operation? That's a long time ago. So I called our Grand Lodge, got the phone number of the Grand Lodge in Lincoln, Nebraska. I called out there. They gave me Mark Eilicher, who's Worshipful Master of Liberty Lodge 300's name. I called him. We had a great conversation with the story, and he passed me off to his secretary, Wade Kendall, and we had a long conversation, and I was supposed to go out there a year ago, this past April. It didn't work out because the Grand Master would not be there. So last September, I traveled out to Lincoln, Nebraska, to Liberty Lodge 300, where I was privileged with their Grand Master being there. Incidentally, I wear the Grand Master's pin of Nebraska. He put it on me, and I gave him one from our Grand Master. We started to do it with past Grand Master Walbridge, and then it got postponed, so then it was George Engels who gave me the letters of introduction to the Worshipful Master and the Grand Master of Nebraska. And I was privileged to present to them I made the presentation of the apron and presented it to Mark Eilicher, who was the Worshipful Master of Liberty Lodge 300. And one of the more moving moments of my life, as I passed the apron to him, he put his hands over mine and held them there, and looking in my eyes said, "This is fantastic. Thank you so very much for the privilege of receiving this back to Liberty Lodge." And then he held it up for the lodge to see. I did kind of be an engine giver, if you will, because I reserved the opportunity to keep the apron to share in groups like this as long as I was able. But it will be framed. We've got the frame stuff worked out. It'll be framed in entered apprentice form with 5 or 7 pictures of presentation back to Liberty Lodge 300 and the story. And if you go back a year, you'll find in our own Indiana Freemason magazine the abbreviated story of this journey. That will be there as well, with pictures of Esta and Carl Christian Herman, my grandfather. tremendous experience for me. I've learned a great deal about feelings and about family as I look back in the journeys that some of them made. Found some pictures, did a lot of digging, but it remains an important part of me now as a past master and one still growing in masonry. I will ever grow to be able to share the story of one man's journey and the apron that protected his daughter a number of years ago, almost 90-some years now, that he received his degrees. A kicker. The McMaster that signed that apron as secretary in 1920 served as worshipful master in the East in 1940. He raised his son, Brother McMaster, at that time. And that son is 94 years old, currently an active member of Liberty Lodge number 300 in Lincoln, Nebraska. Thank you very much.